So before we jump into this video, first of all, guys, I want to say thank you. We have hit 5,000 subscribers. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the channel, checking it out. I believe by the time I upload this video, we'll be over 6,000. And I do have a goal to reach 10,000 subs by the end of this month, January 2019. So please, if you like this video or other videos on the channel, subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. Also, I will be coming out with a Patreon where you guys can support the channel. My goal for 2019 is to be able to document my coaching journey. So that way you guys can see on a day in, day out basis what I do, how I work with my players, and so that you guys can be along for the ride. So if you want to help contribute to that goal, please go over to my Patreon website and you can contribute there. Now, in our last video, we asked the question, who is better at developing talent, America or Europe? And we looked specifically at how Europe develops its players. We talked about the difference between FIBA and the EuroLeague. We looked at how clubs are ran in Europe, and more specifically, how they differ from the individualized development system here in America. In this video, I'm going to be making a case for both Europe and USA. And then at the end, I will be answering the question about who I believe is better at developing basketball players. Now, also, I won't be doing like a laundry list of things about the case for both Europe and the case for both United States. I think that's kind of overkill, and I don't want to keep the video too long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a case for both Europe and USA using maybe 1 or 2 points that either we talked about in our last video and expand upon it more, or some other research that I found. So let's jump into it. So my strongest case for Europe can be summed up in this chart right here. This chart right here shows that in 1981, the NBA was comprised of only 1.8% of international players. By 2016, that number had risen to 28.6% of the NBA was made up of international players. Today in 2019, there's around 110 international players in a league of about 460 some odd players. Now, understand that this international list does include people from other places outside of Europe, like Australia, Africa, other places like that. But the majority of this list is from Europe. Now, you may look at this list and go, well, big deal. That still means that over 70% of the NBA are American-born players. And I would say that is correct. But I would also like to put it like this. Let's say we are running a race and you're starting out 100 yards ahead of me. And you're 100 yards ahead of me and you are driving 30 miles an hour. And I'm 100 yards behind you and I'm driving 60 miles per hour. Which one of us is winning the race? Well, at the moment, you are winning the race. But if I was to ask who is actually going faster, obviously, I would be going faster at 60 miles per hour. The whole point of this chart is to show you that while the better talent is by far in America, I don't think that can be disputed in any way, shape, or form. The better talent is definitely here in America. With the meteoric rise of the international player, I do think it begs the question, is there something that international development systems are doing that American development systems aren't doing? You got to remember that basketball is an American sport. It was created here in America, developed here in America, and America was the first country to have basketball. So you would think that America would obviously have the most basketball players and the most basketball talent. That clearly makes the most sense. But when you look at a chart that says, okay, but in the past 30 years, international players have come into the best basketball league in America, and they have started to fulfill many roles in that American league, I think you have to start to consider what European or international development systems are doing. Remember, we're talking about developing talent, not just natural talent. We're talking about who is able to develop more skilled players. Who does a better job at taking good players and making them great, taking bad players and making them good, taking great players and making them excellent? And I think when you look at how the international player has really come into the NBA, you cannot have an NBA today without the international player. And I think we will all agree that although you don't have many international all-stars, although that is rising, I mean, guys like Ben Simmons, Dirk Nowitzki, technically you could say Kyrie Irving, but we still consider him an American player. You can absolutely say that the international players are contributing to the well-being of the NBA. The question that gets concerned is, have we reached a point where we've plateaued at the number of international players, or will the number of international players continue to go up from here? If from 10 years from now, we're at about 25%, but let's say in the next 10 years from now, we go from 25% international players to about 35% international players or 40% international players, then I think that Europe has a really, really strong case at being better at developing basketball talent. Remember, that's the question. We're not asking who has the better players. We're asking who is better at developing players. Now, I know these two sound similar because the obvious answer would lead you to believe that if you're better at developing players, then you would have the better players, which is only partially true. If you're starting out with more and better talent, there's some things that development can't make up for. There's just some level of talent that you can't make up for. Like, there's no amount of training that can develop a 6'8", 250 linebacker that happens to play every position in basketball. There's no amount of development that can make up for a 7-foot shooting guard. There's nothing you can do about that, right? So I think America by far has the better talent, but I do think Europe is making headway and making gains at developing its talent. So when you look at the chart and you're looking at how fast over the past 30 years that the international players have really come into the American game of basketball and are really starting to contribute, I think we're going to see more, especially with the rise of young players like Luka Donic. Here's a guy who has been a professional in Europe since he was 15 years old. And pretty much at 18, 19 years old, he's come over to America. And I don't think he's the best player in the league. I don't think he's top 10 player in the league. But he is probably the best player on his team at 18 years old, which I think is huge, being the best player on a professional NBA team at 18 years old. And he's one of the better players in his conference. So I think with the rise of young players like Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic, I do think we will start to see American scouters look more over in the international pool to see what we have. We could see a ripple effect from such a young player like Luka Doncic having an effect that we will start to see more international players over here in the NBA. Now let's talk about the U.S. And for the U.S., my biggest argument is the Olympics. I mean, if you look at the Olympics, there's been 19 times that the country has competed in basketball during the Olympics. Of those 19 times, America has won the gold 16 times. The last time America did not win the gold was in 2004, but since then they won the gold in 2008, 2012, and 2016. Now, the Olympics can be a really good measurement at whose country just has the best players. That's literally what the Olympics are to tell us. Which country has the best athletes in a particular sport? And it's very clear that when it comes to the Olympics, America just dominates. But when you look at the Olympics, it is clear that America has the best basketball players. So one of the things people like to say is that America has more talent, but Europe has more skilled players. And my argument against that would be No, they don't. I say let's just look at different basketball skills. Let's take shooting. Let's take the best shooters. Let's take arguably the top 3 shooters in today's game. I think almost all 3 of them would be American. Let's look at the best dribblers in today's game. I think nearly all 3 of them would be American. Post players, it becomes different. I do actually believe Europe is better at developing post players than the United States does. I will give Europe the nod in developing post players. But if you look at the best defenders, I would say that they're all American born. So when you look at the skills of the game, right? Passing, dribbling, shooting, post work, the fundamentals, we always end up with an American on top. It's what they're really saying, that Europe has better average to good players than America's average to good players. So for instance, when you look at the best players in the league today, almost all of them are American. Almost all of them. But when you start getting down to those filler roles, when you start getting down to those 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th men off the bench in the NBA, now you start to see a big influx of international players. And so at this point, I do think there is some validity in saying that Europe does a better job at sort of making role players. That's what I think. I think the European role player oftentimes is better than the American role player. But that's also because I think in America, in our individualized development system, it's like you either make the league or bust. Like everyone's trying to be a superstar in America. Everyone's trying to be a star in their own right. Whereas in Europe, it's more about developing those skills. So if you want to say Europe is better at developing role players, I think that is true. But it's very simple. When you look at the Olympics, when you actually start looking at the best players in the league, the best, if you want to break it down by skill, when you start looking at the best players by skill, you're always going to get American players on top, except when it comes to big men. I believe the European big men are by far better than the American big men. And part of that is because Europe has been developing their big man how America should have been developing their big man. In America, we've sort of phased our big man out. And so if you can't really shoot, particularly in the NBA, you don't really have a purpose as a big man. Whereas in Europe, they're teaching their big man to pass, dribble, and shoot from a young age. And so they don't have to worry about getting phased out. But needless to say, that is my case for America. So here's my final answer about who develops their players better, Europe or America. And I say that the group that develops their players better is America. I think it's America. In 2019, I believe the United States of America does a better job at developing their players than Europe. Look, we didn't even get into the NCAA. I'm going to create a whole series on the NCAA. But the NCAA is probably one of the best development systems in the entire world. I think the NCAA is better than parts of the Euro League. I think it's better than the parts of the club system. The biggest problem with the NCAA is that they're greedy and they're taking advantage of people. But again, I'm going to have a whole series on the NCAA. We haven't even talked about the G League. The NBA has recently really got aggressive about the G League. Okay? We haven't even talked about women's basketball. When we start talking about women's basketball and we start talking about women's side of the Olympics, again, it's not even close. Our women are by far better developed here in America than they are overseas. This is why in America, our women can only get paid, I think the max contract in the WNBA is $153,000. Whereas Brittany Griner makes over $1 million in Russia. So it's clear that our women are way better developed than European players. And even when you look at the Euro League, many of the better players in the Euro League are American born. I mean, it's not just that the NBA rosters have a lot of European players. The Euro rosters have a lot of American players. So at this point in 2019, I do believe that America is better at developing its players than Europe. Although by 2029, that could change. We got to see what's going to happen with the one and done rule. We got to see what's going to happen with the G League and what kind of reforms and changes will happen to the NCAA. In later videos, I'm going to talk about changes that the NCAA are making that will affect even the AAU circuit, summer basketball. It's actually going to limit the amount of games that you can play in AAU during the summer, different stuff like that, or how many events that a coach can attend. But we'll get into all that later. But again, let me know what you think down in the comment section. Who do you think is better at developing players? I do think both sides have legitimate arguments. At this point, though, I believe it's America. Again, if you like the channel, please support it. Head over to my Patreon page and please support the channel. Like it if you like it. Subscribe if you're new. And I'll see you next time. Peace.